All right, let's dive right into this explainer and tackle what's honestly a pretty frustrating puzzle for anyone deep in academic research. We're talking about how to properly reference a working paper using Harvard style. Let's get into it.
So how exactly do you cite a paper that isn't quite finished yet? It's a totally fair question, right? And if you're trying to build a rock-solid bibliography, it can definitely trigger some referencing anxiety. I mean, think about it. How on earth do you cite a source that isn't a traditional book, but also isn't a finalized, peer-reviewed journal article? Working papers live in this really fascinating transitional space. Researchers use them to stake an early claim on a brand new discovery or to get vital feedback from their peers way before formal publication. But because they sit in this active, evolving space, citing them accurately is absolutely vital. You're basically citing a moving target. So we need a highly specific set of rules to make sure your reader can track down the exact snapshot of the research you used.
Now, instead of looking at a reference as just a miserable list of arbitrary formatting demands, try thinking of it as a blueprint. By breaking these seemingly abstract rules down into tangible building blocks, you'll actually see that constructing a perfect citation is incredibly logical. Every single piece of information serves a very specific function. It guides your reader right back to the exact source you analyzed, creating this foolproof trail of academic evidence.
To build up that confidence, let's gather the mandatory ingredients for your bibliography. A standard working paper reference usually includes these core elements in a very strict order. First, the author. Second, the year. Third, the paper title. Okay, here is where it gets highly specific to this format. Fourth, the working paper series, and fifth, the paper number. Since these papers lack the permanent architecture of a peer-reviewed journal, those series numbers are literally the only reliable breadcrumbs for future researchers to follow. Next up is the institution or publisher that released it. And finally, the digital locator. That's going to be either a stable URL or a DOI, which stands for Digital Object Identifier. A DOI is basically a permanent digital fingerprint for a document. Grab those 7 elements, and you've got the complete foundation for your citation.
But wait, there is one highly important variable ingredient in your blueprint to keep in mind. Honestly, treat this as a pro tip because it can save you from losing easy marks. Harvard referencing isn't always identical across every single university. You absolutely have to check if your specific institution's Harvard variant demands an access date for online sources. Because working papers live online and can change, that date accessed acts as your alibi. It essentially tells your reader, hey, this is exactly what the paper looked like on the specific day I read it. It's a small detail, but checking your variant-specific rules is what separates a pretty good bibliography from a flawless one.
Of course, having a flawless bibliography at the end of your document is really only half the battle. You also have to point your reader back to that master blueprint while they're actually reading through your paragraphs. But the good news here, the workflow for in-text citations is incredibly streamlined.
The core in-text formula is about as straightforward as it gets. When you're paraphrasing a concept or just summarizing the overall argument of the working paper, you simply need to use the author and the year. That's it. Just the author's surname and the year the working paper was released. Harvard specifically uses this minimal author date system by design. It's meant to keep your original ideas front and center so your page doesn't get heavily cluttered with footnotes and distracting data.
However, if you're capturing the author's exact words, that formula requires one more crucial piece. You need the exact page number. For direct quotation, using just the author and the years simply isn't going to cut it. You have to pinpoint exactly where that quote lives. This level of accuracy is entirely about academic accountability. It lets anyone reading your work immediately verify the quote in its original, unfinished context, just to make absolutely sure you haven't misrepresented the researcher's early ideas.
Now, navigating academic formatting means navigating the historical record of the research, and let's be honest, occasionally navigating academic egos too. If the working paper you're citing has several authors, you must keep them in their published order. Do not alphabetize them yourself, and definitely don't rearrange them based on who you think contributed more. Author order heavily implies the weight of contribution to a project, and the researchers agreed on that specific, negotiated order when they released the paper. So changing it isn't just a tiny formatting error, it's potentially rewriting academic history. Your citation has to reflect exactly what's printed on the document.
Okay, let's slow down for a quick second, because we really need to talk about the most dangerous pitfall when handling these types of sources. I call it the version control trap. Because working papers are inherently unfinished, they are uniquely vulnerable to this issue. They're living drafts. That means the underlying data, the conclusions, or even the title of the paper itself might drastically shift before formal publication. Working papers very frequently evolve into formally published journal articles, and this creates a huge temptation to mix and match details when you're writing out your reference list. The rule here is absolute. Confirm which version you actually read and never combine details from different versions. For example, if you read a working paper published in 2022, you absolutely cannot cite it using the journal name it was finally published under in 2024. If you read the working paper, cite the working paper. You must only cite the exact specific version that actually shaped your thoughts and research.
Tracking all this metadata manually, the series numbers, the DOIs, the strict version control, is honestly exhausting. It is a ton of meticulous data entry. But you don't actually have to memorize where every single comma and italicized word goes. There is an insider academic secret, a digital shortcut that takes a massive amount of pain out of this whole process, ensuring your punctuation and formatting are flawless every single time.
I'm talking about the Harvard Reference Generator, which you can find at harvardreferencegenerator.co.uk. It's a powerful, purpose-built tool designed to completely automate the creation of your reference. It basically takes the raw data of your source and perfectly aligns it to that rigid Harvard blueprint we talked about earlier, saving you from some incredibly tedious proofreading. For anyone looking to streamline their workflow, it is an absolute game changer.
But you gotta remember the golden rule of automation. Garbage in, garbage out. The tool only works if the data you provide is accurate in the first place. While the automation handles the formatting, you, the human, are still fully responsible for the accuracy of those underlying research details. So step 1 is mandatory. Verify the correct details, specifically the series name, the paper number, the institution, and the exact version, by checking the paper's title page or its official repository record. Only once you've manually confirmed those specifics should you proceed to step 2, which is actually using the tool to generate the reference.
As you build your references with these structured rules, it leaves us with a truly fascinating thought about the nature of human knowledge itself. The sources you're painstakingly formatting right now are living, breathing documents. It really makes you wonder, will the working paper you cite today evolve into tomorrow's definitive journal article? And how might the core arguments, the data, or the conclusions change between that fragile early version you cited and the final publication? It's a pretty powerful reminder that in academia, knowledge isn't static, it's always a work in progress. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and happy citing!